Hey, how's it going? This is Jeff here. I got a fun one for you guys today, and today I want to talk about a little bit about my background. This is a topic that I've been meaning to talk about for quite some time, getting quite a bit of questions on it as I talk a lot about like my early days in college and of course grinding through becoming a software engineer, the struggles that I went through, but I think that there's a lot of context that I've been meaning to tell and stories before that I've been meaning to tell, and one of the main ones that I've been looking forward to talk about is this idea of how I was able to break basically generational poverty, low income, that kind of thing for my entire family, and how I was able to escape that and be the first person to truly escape that and basically elevate my family and myself into a new space in general through software engineering. But before that, I wanted to actually, I think a lot of the stories that I talk about on this channel are the side effects and the grind through that. But I definitely think the earlier days growing up set a lot of the foundation of why I took a lot of the directions that I ended up taking and why I even think the way I think, right? And so I figured it'd be an interesting one to be able to share this and honestly, hopefully provide you a little bit of motivation and just another story of someone that as going through a grind, went through the grind like many of you out there. And before I start, I think the point of this story actually also leads me deeply into why I created this channel in the first place, which I'll talk about later on. But more importantly, I've never ever felt like I had some sort of insane upbringing or different background. In fact, I think my background is very much relatable. It's like it's as average and as normal and as basic as it gets. And I think that's the beauty behind it. It's such an average and common story in our place today where it's like most people that I know, or before I moved to San Francisco for tech, most people that I know are just living average lives, doing things. And this idea of being able to like truly pursue a passion of yours is a rare one to be able to fully get into. And I think I'm one of the lucky folks that what has been able to escape the circumstances of, their life and be able to even attempt to be able to pursue, their goals and their dreams and that kind of stuff. And even more so, the miracle for myself is even being able to actually do what I love every single day in and day out, and have the opportunity to even take risk, right? Like making these YouTube videos, doing something on the side, and whatever idea I come up with, I can try to execute now at this point. I've definitely come a long way from there, but that's what I mean by this is that it's like, I don't think I'm unique in any sort of way. In fact, I think this story and why I made this channel in general is because I realized how relatable, and I remember all the folks I met in those earlier days and still have a lot of connections and ties to that sort of lifestyle. I wasn't really sure how to label this video, so I think that I'll just tell the story, talk through what I mean by generational low income poverty, and talk about how I made a spark and how I initially created a spark to be able to remove myself and break out of that. Okay, so first, really important just to be able to talk about background, that kind of stuff, just to give you guys a little bit of background. My parents are first generation immigrants. They moved around a lot to find work. They mainly worked in Chinese restaurants their entire life. And then later in their life, most recently, my parents do minimum wage work, still up to this day. And we're talking like service industry, blue collar jobs. For example, my mom is a lunch lady. And growing up, it was an interesting dynamic, right? And I think the dynamic that I always had is that my father was always known as the ox of the family. And that might sound like a compliment of some sorts, and it is in many ways. But what it means to be the ox of the family is that he's like the workhorse, right? The laborer of the family. He had a couple siblings, and I think only one of them had like higher education. They both have like at best middle school, elementary school education. Like really early on, they went out to work in the workforce, and even when they immigrated here, that transitioned to me. A lot of that transitioned to me because when you grow up in those environments, everybody in your community has a role. Nobody thinks you're going to go, and if they see your dad, if they see your father, they see your relatives do a certain job, no one looks at you and thinks, hey, that kid right there is going to end up being a doctor, right? Or something like that. Or nobody makes that push. So there's a natural progression, in my opinion, that when you're from that background, they expect you to do things like that as well. And so really early on, I remember I took on what my dad did, right? A lot of times, and I was there to always assist. Really early on, I remember being like 11 years old, something like that. And I did a full re-roof of a building, right? With my dad. Just imagine a 12-year-old kid out there doing roofing, right? Like real, and not, I'm talking about roofing as in not with a harness and all the jazz and the safety equipment and the right drill and tools and that kind of stuff. Gloves, hands, whatever makeshift tools we bought at old garage sales, that kind of thing. And we were going at it. And I remember spending my summer doing that. Unpaid, of course. And then another thing is, as I mentioned, we were very involved in the restaurant industry with my parents, working in Chinese restaurants their whole life. By the time I was probably 15, I can't tell you how many dumplings and egg rolls and stuff like that I folded in my lifetime, probably in the hundreds of thousands, if not more, right? So a lot of fun time growing up. I resented it a lot because I saw like the peers, right? I was in America. I was born here in America, and a lot of my peers were like out doing stuff. And as a kid, I just wanted a game. I just wanted to play video games all day long. And although I had some of my video games, I didn't understand the value of working. And I spent a lot of days with like my grandma, for example, in a restaurant basement, in a dark basement, folding dumplings. And I remember, I guess it was interesting. I just remember being afraid to look left and right in the basement, being a young kid, because it was like, there's only a little light shining on the little dumpling station we're at. And left and right was literally like dungeon status basement in a commercial building. So just a little funny side story. Being in that environment, right? Another funny part is because that's who my parents were. They were loving, they were caring, but they had a role in their community and their family, right? My dad and my mom weren't college scholars, right? That was devoted, and a lot of the family resources that we had were funneled into different family members, right? It was almost like this interesting dynamic where very early on, my grandparents decided or the community, not even my grandparents, but the community decided that, hey, this is the star of the community. So let's try to rally around them and see what else we can do. And unfortunately for myself, my parents were the laborers, right? We weren't the brains of any sort of operation. And same thing, wasn't expected as like that. And then I guess the moral of that first part is that just like my parents, I was expected to do the same. I guess another example I have is nobody ever really checked my grades. Nobody was really, except for my mom, of course, nobody was after what I was doing. By 10, 11, 12 years old, somewhere around there, my parents were working 15-hour days, if not more. And I spent days, every day, weeks by myself after school, like from 11, when you get off school at 2 p.m. I spent days, months on end by myself at home until my parents got off work at nighttime. So that was interesting childhood of mine. And then on top of that, because of that, we of course, we didn't attend any sort of like private school or upscale neighborhood. I grew up in a super diverse community, which I honestly enjoyed the most. Some of my best friends and the people I know are from all backgrounds of life. And I saw a lot of crazy stuff, right? I remember going to my friend's house, spending the night there, and their electricity shut off. And I remember not understanding that when I was a little kid, and just like telling our other friends, like, oh man, I was at our buddy's house and the electricity turned off and we didn't have electricity the whole night. And just funny things like that sort of happened, not fully being aware until my later days. I had an older sister. My older sister had it 10x, 20x, even worse than I did, because I was younger and born in the States. She actually didn't arrive here in America until her teenage years, like early, I think 10, 11, 12, something like that. And you can imagine that's really difficult for a child. And on top of that, during the time that she came here, our feeder high school was the most dangerous school in Oregon, ranked number 1. I remember craziest thing ever. I just remember the craziest thing I saw was like there was something like her year. There was like it was on the news and it was like 35 Hondas were stolen out of the school parking lot that year at the school. Which I mean, you can imagine that, right? This is a school. We're not talking about like a mall. We're talking about high school. Like people were just going to that high school, stealing each other's cars. We're talking about fights every day. I remember there was this kid that got it in middle school. A kid got stabbed on the stairways and passed away. We're talking middle school here, like two middle school kids stabbed each other. So interesting upbringing, but for my sister and I, especially for her, we teetered a lot. Like we teetered because we had great loving parents. We were nowhere near, although we didn't have the best upbringing in the world, right? Like we didn't have the best things in the world. We had food. We always had food. We always had clothes, fresh clothes, that kind of thing. And my parents always made sure to keep us clean, fresh, got all the things we needed. And in comparison to the kids that I grew up with, looking back, some kids had it 50,000 times worse than I did. I remember there was this student, I was like in middle school, and there was this kid where every time he sat down at a chair, oh man, every time he sat down at a chair, that chair would automatically smell so bad that nobody else can sit in that chair for the rest of the day, type of thing. And it just shows, like, thinking back, right? Those kids were definitely bullied back in the day, but thinking back, it wasn't as simple as that. It's not like that kid didn't want to shower. Shoot, maybe they didn't have water at home, or they didn't have, just like me, right? Like maybe their parents worked long hours and they didn't have that sort of direction to go take a shower every single day. Interesting things definitely happen, but the story does actually get better from this. Just hardworking, strong parents, strong, loving parents, worked a lot, zero expectations from me, I think at best. Nobody there. We didn't have any engineers. At that point, we didn't even have anybody that went to college. Like going to college was like, I don't even think we knew anybody that officially went to college yet. And that's actually where this story kind of takes a positive turn. So where this kind of first spark that takes a positive turn is that, luckily for myself, my sister was a rebellious person in those early days, rightfully so, being a teenager that was like, just like me, forced to work, but because they were older, forced to work even harder and doing different jobs and was relied on even more. Outside of just physically helping at restaurants, helping serve food as a teenager and middle schooler, whatever it may be, high schooler, all the paperwork, all the bills, taxes, all that stuff was like done by my sister, and then later on myself. When early days, it's like kids could barely read. My sister was probably helping my parents go sign up for government assistance of whatever sorts. So she luckily had a little bit of a rebellious nature to her and pushed herself and found her way to going to college. And so those early days, she was like, what was funny about this is that this is the first time I ever saw, from my eyes, the dynamic shift. And I started to understand that I started to see like my family dynamics in a fairly different way. My community. I saw it in the sense that my sister went to college, but it wasn't something that was like celebrated. And the reason why it wasn't celebrated, even though being probably the first Asian person in my family in Oregon, we had other cousins do it, of course, in other places, but the closest person we knew within hand's reach to go to college, it wasn't celebrated because, unfortunately for her, again, back to the original story, is that original points of the story is like our family, like my immediate family wasn't destined to go to college. Rather than seeing and being celebrated and learning why and understanding the reasons, it was brushed off. And in fact, I remember hearing things like, oh, like your sister's just going to some garbage school, whatever, doesn't really mean anything, and that kind of thing. And so it was the first time ever I saw like some of the, I guess, I think the best way I can put it is that there was a lot of jealousy involved, and no matter how good she could potentially do, the downside for them is that for the immediate family and the community is that we lost a set of hands to, help with dishes and fold dumplings and stuff like that, or do paperwork for the elderly. Whereas like my sister was then ventured off and went to college. And for myself, I personally didn't even know what this meant. Um, because nobody made it a big deal, I didn't think it was a big deal either. And she went off, and that's when I was like, a lot of times, she was 7 years older than me, and that's when I went through like high school, or late middle school, that kind of stuff on my own without my sister for the very first time. And what I mean by that is, again, like my parents worked 15, 20 hours, like just all day long. And so the only person I knew at home was my sister. So fast forward, right? This is where I first started and realized that the lighter, I guess the spark was starting to spark for an idea, a concept to be able to escape what I was destined to do, basically, right? And that's when my sister, because of her nature, she did a lot of interesting things for me. She was the first person that ever took me to Disneyland. We stayed at a Motel 6. It was the first vacation I ever went on. But more importantly, she introduced me to sports early on, which is unheard of. And she didn't just sign me up for any sports. She signed me up for football, American football, if you're from out of the US. And up until that point, I like Super Smash Brothers. I like Nintendo. I have never even seen a football game in my entire life. I didn't even get it. I've never ever even thought about playing football, but she signed me up. And as football is no cakewalk. It's definitely a violent sport, especially in middle and nowhere, low income America. Your equipment, all that, it's no joke. But she signed me up, and I didn't really quite get it. I remember crying, throwing a fuss, like all that. And the very first day of practice, I ended up doing it, right? The very first day of practice, I clearly remember that all the kids were out there. It was all these kids that I never really got talked to, communicated with. And there was knee pads, right? There's knee pads in the pants. And I remember I didn't know what the heck to do with those. So I put those in my back, in my butt. I thought they were butt pads because they're shaped in that form. And I remember one of the kids was like, I remember Chris, he looked at me and he's like, "Hey, Jeff, what are you doing? What is that?" He was like looking at my butt, looking at those pads, and he's, "What are those doing there?" And he told me that, and I was like, and I looked at him and I noticed that they go on the knee. I looked at him and I saw that he had pads on his knees, and I immediately just was like, "Oh, I'm just holding these in place here. This is just a," and I just remember that moment. I guess that moment was the first ever true cultural divide moment that I ever had in my lifetime, where different life aspects of that was so different than what I was genuinely used to. And it was the first time ever being exposed to something like that. Just a funny little story. But what I didn't realize from those moments is that those moments actually played an incredibly large role in my upbringing. Not because I fell in love with sports afterwards. I ended up playing baseball, basketball, football, tennis for some time. And I was like a Asian sports kid at that point. And although I didn't have a successful career, and those are stories for another day, they did a lot for me. They did a lot in the sense that they took up my time and provided a good argument for me not to have to go to the restaurant and fold dumplings, or go to some like other family event thing where I'm there to do like more manual labor, or help my dad out, to go help my uncle out, or whatever, do some plumbing or whatever it may have been. And so it was like this excuse that I think was so out of the box that, to be honest, nobody knew even how to say no, right? To my parents, they didn't understand. My parents never once saw me go play a football game in my life. My parents never once they probably seen me play baseball 3 or 4 times. They've seen me play basketball 2 or 3 times in the lifetime of like my sports career. And I played all the way up until high school. And they never picked me up. They never went to any sort of like community event, right? They just more than likely dropped me off, picked me up. But even more so, like the clause of me playing sports was that basically I had to find my own ride there and back. A lot of times I walked from there and back. But yeah, 2 things happened, right? Number one is that my parents luckily didn't understand what I was doing, really. thought it was just like extracurricular. And I was a chubbier kid too. So they were like, yeah, good. Working out. They see me losing weight. So they're like, and they hated gaming. So I guess it was like an excuse me not to game. It was a part of the school, quote unquote. And so I had a lot of great excuses to not have to go to the restaurant or help other family members out do like useless tasks because they didn't have the funds or they didn't really have the means to be able to hire somebody or didn't want to hire somebody because of course it's cheaper to have family do it for free for you. And the second thing that it did for me is that it really introduced me to a lot of new people, and I started developing my own sort of friendships and way of life that more fit the natural community that I was in. I think that if it wasn't for sports, if it wasn't for my sister making this push for me, I think I would have been more of a shallow, like a more reserved Chinese guy in the American culture, American state, just minding my own business. And it's funny, right? I think that when you think about Chinese kids, you think about being so academic and being forced to do Kumon and extracurricular. If you don't know what Kumon is, it's like extra after school classes on top of your classes. That wasn't really me, right? It wasn't really me. My Kumon was to go fix a car or do an oil change for my cousin or whatever, right? Or go fix a siding or a leak or go full dumplings. That was my Kumon. And so just being introduced to new people, I built some of like my best friends in my entire, so I built some incredible friendships till this day. And it all started with that. And more importantly, introduced me to different and variable ways of thinking, right? Other than the way I was currently thinking. And so it wasn't easy, again, right? Because my sister eventually went off to college. I teetered a lot between kind of good and bad. And what I mean by that is I'd play my sports, do my stuff. I still got terrible grades. I think in high school I had like a 2.0. I was teetering. I probably wasn't extremely on track to go to college. But I had moments, right? And luckily for myself, and I think this is a lot of thanks to my immediate family, is that although I seen a lot of bad things growing up, fights at parties. Actually, we just talked about the story the other day. I was exposed to methamphetamines probably at 13 years old or 14 years old. I think it was 14, freshman year of high school. So I was like I didn't do it myself, but I was in the room and I was like, the story was like, I got completely shell shocked seeing it for the first time and at such a young age. And then just all kinds of stuff, teetering. I teetered from hanging out with the bad kids to hanging out with some of my best friends now. And I just never let myself, something in me, like something in my head, just never let me fall all the way down, if that makes sense. Like I've definitely fallen down. I've gotten beat up a couple times. I was jumped a couple times. I had things stolen from me. And seen a lot of really bad things happen to some of my classmates, but I never like truly fell my face, right? I might have fallen on my knees. I knew that was the limit for myself. And luckily for myself, I never let myself go that far in the deep end. And the way I like to think of it is like, I was like floating, right? Like my entire childhood up till even through college, I was like floating just with my head above the water, paddling, through life. And luckily for me, that was enough to help me push me towards different ideas and different thought processes. So college admissions come around, and luckily for myself, through sports, I was able to meet some of my best friends that I still have till this day. And they were like the smart kids in our school. I think in our school, there was only 30 people or 40 people went to college out of a couple hundred. And I think a 4-year institution, maybe like a handful, something like that. And I was lucky enough to make those my best friends, have some of my best friends be the folks in that community, in those environments that did end up going to a 4-year college. But for myself, I was like the absolute worst out of all of them. I graduated, I have the funniest picture ever, right? How like folks that graduate, you got the valedictorian lanyards, all the clubs you're in. I walked through graduation, or most of my class walked through graduation, and our robes were just green, and I was just green, right? Like I had no lanyard, nothing. Like I just walked through, and it was just a solid green, no tassels, I think they're called, or anything like that. And barely scraped by. I was waitlisted into the college that I ended up going to, which is the University of Oregon, a college that has a 75, I think, or 80% acceptance rate at that time, probably even higher at that time. Like pretty much everybody got in, and I got in on the very, very last round, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Like I was solely going because my sister went there. I picked a major for myself that I really know nothing about, absolutely not a single thing about. And I went there because my best friends were going there, and you know, I enjoyed football and watching sports at that time. And so those are my reasons for picking my major, picking the school. And I was waitlisted, got in very last minute. I took the SAT 3 times because I scored in the, it was like really odd. And this is why, and this is how I knew I was like, I knew I wanted to do engineering of some sort or learn engineering, although I was going to a liberal arts school without an engineering program. This is like my first signs I knew that I probably should do some sort of STEM thing, because I scored decently well on the math, maybe my natural Asian genes, but in reading skills, I scored in the bottom, like probably 30 percentile. And a little fun fact, the school that I went to overall scores in the bottom 10 percentile in nationally, academics wise, in reading skills. And I definitely contributed to the low reading outcomes at my school. But again, I was nowhere near to the bottom. I think that there was a lot of kids that literally could not, this sounds insane, but they probably could not read. And I was like basically one or two steps above them at the point of graduating college. I go to college, I get really bad grades, 1.8 major GPA. I finish, end up doing a construction job. And there I was exactly where I was probably expected to end up at. And I think in my head, this is where the story really takes a large turn. And the story that I try to tell a lot on this channel is where it takes a large turn. And some things that I don't actually talk about is that there was a really large blessing in all this, right? Every step of the way, from my sister telling me to play sports, taking me away from doing any more roofing jobs at 12 years old, to going to college, sliding by going to college because my sister was able to show me that path, to then getting at least some sort of adult job that wasn't in the restaurant industry, or being brave enough and being confident enough to at least go out and try to venture out in this world, really all added up together. It all added up together. And what I mean by it all added up together is that I found myself just in a place where I finally was like removed from that lifestyle. I had a job. There's no way I could go help do any more restaurant stuff or whatever it may be. And what was crazy is that at that point, it went really silent. It went silent, and silent for me, like there was no longer anybody looking after me. And it just went silent for me because I was just like a nobody working, nobody job, day in and day out. And once you become an adult, then you leave that kind of that community. That personally was the side effect of all those things adding up, leading to this. The best thing about this was that it finally, for the first time ever, I felt like gave me an opportunity to clearly think and take action and decide what I wanted to do with my life moving forward. And because nobody cared about me, nobody was trying to get me to do things or whatever it may be, it was the first time I ever thought about, hey, like I'm really passionate about becoming an engineer. I really enjoy this aspect of my life and learning about these new things. Nobody's there to care or think about me anyways. I'm just working a job, and why not give this a shot? And why not give this a try? Why not give my own personal dreams a chance? Like I felt like I was just young enough where I had a full-time job, not doing what I wanted to do, doing some blue-collar work, but I was young enough as well to give myself a second chance and like a full-on opportunity to be able to go pursue what I wanted to do. And the rest of the story is history, right? The rest of the story is what I'm trying to tell you, talk about on this channel, right? Going through the grind of becoming an engineer, self-teaching myself, taking unaccredited courses, applying for jobs, and grinding through the career journey to all the way up to landing that big tech job, which is where I'm at now. So it's been a great journey. And that's a little bit about the background of myself. But to then end this off, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about how that upbringing and how that life really made me pursue making this channel. You know, as you know now, right, I have my own successes and my own family, right, doing my own thing. And I'm lucky enough because of financial means, that kind of stuff, that I feel like I'm finally at a point where I can creatively take chances and do what I want. And one day I had this idea of creating this channel to just talk about the grind and making it through life, discovering what you want to do and going after what you're passionate about. And one of the main reasons why I did this in the first place is because very early on in those spaces, like in middle school and high school, in those communities, I saw people sell drugs. I saw people do all, like, I saw athletes that could have been like the next great athletes out in this world that ended up going to jail, right? I saw all kinds of stuff. And what I recognize is that, just like myself, most people that I knew had an incredibly large, great potential to do something amazing. Like, those kids that were selling drugs could have been the next MBA student. It probably could have made laps around the current people working at Goldman Sachs or getting their MBA at Stanford. But there's a lot of unrecognized potential out in this world. Growing up, I saw a kid, one of the biggest turnarounds that I saw was really early on. I met a kid that had South Side tatted. He had South on one elbow and then Side on the other elbow. So when he put his elbows out together like this, it read South Side. And we called him, his name was Southside. That's what we called it. I don't even know his name till this day. But that kid was able to turn his life around and he ended up becoming the anchor of our graduating class. And what the anchor is the last person that walks across the stage for being like the most incredible person to be able to at least finish high school. I don't know where he is now, but I know for a fact that feat alone was extremely challenging for that gentleman with the lifestyle that he was in. And so with myself and a lot of other examples from that community, we have people that have gained success and gained a lot of success outside of myself from those spaces. But of course, many that have not as well. And so my whole idea and my thought process behind all this is just, I want to be that person and do it at scale to be able to see who else's potential I could help try to unlock, and at least give you some motivation to remind you that it is possible to get yourself into a new situation if you're not happy with yours that you're currently in. And I'm a true believer that the best lawyers, doctors, engineers, businessmen, politicians, whatever it may be, we in our lifetime will probably never ever see the true best of those that the world has to offer, mainly because of circumstance. And so we're in this place in this world where, for the first time ever, in my opinion, where there's a great equalizer, at least a slight equalizer, that can potentially help change your life, right? Like never in our lifetime, where you can just hear someone like my story or others tell you that it's possible. And so I realized that I just wanted to be one of those voices, one of the many. And I recognize that my story alone I don't think that it's going to be like someone's going to watch it or someone's going to think that this one thing alone is going to be a lifestyle, a life-changing like thing. But I think that just like the programming community, just like engineering, it takes a lot of little tiny nodes over and over again that adds up into something bigger. And I'm just hoping to be one of those small nodes. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that story about a little bit about my background and how I got to where I am today. This one's a little bit longer, but if you have any questions about any of that, I'd love to hear it. If not, I'll talk to you on the next one. Latest.